Hey designers, this is Kristen from Cut File Classroom, where I share tips and tutorials for designing and selling SVG cut files for Cricut, Silhouette, and other craft cutting machines. In this video, I'm going to show how to design rolled paper flowers in Adobe Illustrator. These 3D flowers have been very popular in crafting for several years now, with no signs of slowing down. If you want to follow along, I've included a link below where you can download this Illustrator file, which includes these finished designs, the vector spiral shape, and 2 sample petal brushes. Rolled flower designs start with a spiral shape, which is typically cut from paper, and then rolled to create a 3D flower. The look of the finished flower will vary depending on how the petals are designed. For example, this spiral with the scalloped edges ends up looking like this. And this spiral with the skinny separated petals ends up looking like this. So let's get designing. First, I'll just move these off to the side so I have a clean artboard to work with. And then I'll begin by creating the spiral shape. Now, Illustrator has a spiral tool hidden under the line tool here, but we do not want to use it for this design because, as you can see, it creates uneven spirals where the spacing gets wider at the ends. What we want for this design is a linear spiral, which has even spacing throughout. To create a linear spiral, I'm going to use the Polar Grid tool, which is also hidden here under the Line tool. With the Polar Grid tool selected, I'll click once on the artboard to bring up the Polar Grid settings. I'll go with 5" by 5" and set the concentric dividers to 4. You can adjust this number depending on how big or small you want your flower to be. Make sure radial dividers is set to 0 and leave the bottom options unchecked. Then click OK. And now we have a polar grid based on our settings. To make this into a spiral, I'm going to grab the direct selection tool and I'll click and drag to select only the top half of this shape. Then I'll press Command or Control X to cut the top half and Command or Control F to paste it in front. With the top half still selected, I'm going to shift it over to the right. But before I do, I'm first going to make sure that I have Smart Guides turned on and Snap to Point turned on. Both of these options can be found in the View menu. Now, with the top half of the circle still selected, I'm going to click and drag it to the right until the lines meet up with the next row. When they snap into place, I'll let go of the mouse. This is what gives us the spiral shape. But now we have 2 spirals and we only need 1. So I'll use the Group Selection tool to select every other line starting from the top and going down to the bottom. I'm holding Shift as I click to select multiple paths at the same time. Now that I have the extra spirals selected, I can delete them, which leaves me with a single linear spiral. But right now, the top and bottom halves are still separate paths, so I'll select the full spiral and head to Object, Path, Join, or press Command or Control J on my keyboard to join the paths. And now we have a continuous linear spiral path that we can use over and over again to create different rolled flower designs. One more thing I like to do is place a circle at the center of the spiral. I'll press L on my keyboard to select the ellipse tool, and I'll hold Shift as I click and drag to make a perfect circle. And I'll tuck it right in the center of the spiral path. This helps serve as a base for the flower when it's assembled. The rolled edges of the flower can be glued down to the base to hold everything in place. Okay, so now we're ready to create our rolled flower designs. Generally, rolled flowers will have 2 types of petals. In this first type, the petals are pretty wide and tend to flow right into each other. I'll start with this basic scallop design since this is one of the most common styles of rolled flowers. The scallop shape is essentially a semicircle, so I'll press the L key to bring up the ellipse tool again, and I'll hold Shift as I click and drag to make a perfect circle. I like to use the spiral as a gauge to see more or less how big the petal should be. Then I'll select the bottom anchor point and delete it, leaving me with just the top half of the circle. Next, I'll press the M key to grab the rectangle tool, and I'll click and drag to draw a rectangle shape right under the half circle. Since I still have Smart Guides turned on, it helps me draw this rectangle so it lines up perfectly with the half circle. To combine these into a single shape, I'll select them both and then head to the Pathfinder panel and click Unite. If you don't have the Pathfinder panel open, you can head to the Windows menu to bring it up on your screen. Next, we need to repeat this petal shape around the spiral path. To do that, we're going to make it into a pattern brush. If you don't have the Brushes panel open, head to Windows, Brushes to open it up. I'll select this shape and drag it into the Brushes panel. In the new brush window, I'll choose Pattern Brush and click OK. In the Brush Options window, we can see how our brush is going to look. For this design, I'm going to leave all of these settings as is and click OK. Now we can see that our new scallop brush has been added to the bottom of the Brushes panel. To apply this brush to our spiral, I'm going to click on the spiral and then I'll click on the scallop brush we just made. And now we see our scallops have been applied to the spiral. At this point, you want to check your design and make sure that there's some space between the top of the petals and the bottom edge of the next coil. If your petals are too big and they overlap, or if you just want to play with the sizing, you can decrease the stroke weight to make the petals smaller. In this case, I'm going to keep the stroke at 1. The next thing I'm going to do is just move the center circle over a bit so it flows better with the petal shape of this design. And now, since this is a cut file, we need to expand this brush into an actual vector shape. First, I'll press Alt as I click and drag to make a copy of this brush spiral over to the side. That way, I can come back to this later and make changes if I want to. Then, I'll select the full design, including the center circle, and in the top menu, I'll choose Object, Expand Appearance. Now we see that the brush has been expanded into individual vector shapes. While everything is still selected, I'll head to the Pathfinder panel and click Unite to make this all one single shape. The final step is to use Simplify to clean up all these extra anchor points because excess nodes are not good for cutting machines. With the shape selected, right-click and choose Simplify. In the window that appears, you can adjust the settings depending on your design. These are generally the settings that work for me, so I'll make sure that Retain My Latest Settings is checked and click OK. And now the scalloped rolled flower is done. For the second type of flower, the petals are individually defined and spaced out, so they need a connector to hold them together, which is this rectangle at the bottom. As you can see, there's tons of different petal designs that you can create, but I'll show you how to create the skinny daisy petal as an example. I'll press the L key to grab the ellipse tool again, and this time I'll click and drag to make a tall, skinny oval. I like to use the direct selection tool to select just the middle anchor points and drag them down a bit so the petal is wider at the bottom and tapers in at the top. Then I'll press M to bring up the rectangle tool, and I'll draw a small rectangle at the bottom of the oval as my connector. You don't want this rectangle to be too short or it'll be too skinny and hard to work with when it's cut. The rectangle should also be a little wider than the petal itself to create the spacing we need between each petal. You'll get the hang of how much space you want to leave as you design more flowers. I'm just going to make sure this is centered. When I think it looks good, I'll select the oval and rectangle and drag them into the Brushes panel. Click Pattern Brush and click OK. And in the Brush Options window, we can see a preview of our design. At this point, if we don't like the spacing between the flowers, we can click Cancel and go back and tweak the width of the rectangle and then drag it back into the Brushes panel. In this case, I like how it looks, so I'll go ahead and click OK. Now I can make a copy of our spiral path and bring it over to my artboard. With the spiral selected, I'll click the new petal brush to apply it to the path. I think this looks a little big, so I can either decrease the stroke weight like I mentioned before, or I can double click on the brush in the Brushes panel, which will bring the brush options back up. Make sure Preview is checked, and next to Scale, you can use the slider to adjust the size, or you can type in a specific percentage. I'll type in 80, and I think that looks much better, so I'll click OK. Now because we already had this brush applied to a path, Illustrator's asking if we want to update this brush with our changes, or leave them the way they were. In this case, I want to use the new settings, so I'll click Apply to Strokes. Now I'll adjust the center circle so it makes more sense for this design, and once I'm happy, I can expand it into vector shapes. First, I'll make a copy over to the side. Then I'll select the spiral and center circle, and I'll choose Object, Expand Appearance. Now I know this looks super crazy with a ton of nodes, but while everything is still selected, I'll head to Pathfinder and click Unite. Then I'll right-click and choose Simplify. The window should appear with my settings from last time, and we can see a preview of how much cleaner this is, so I'll click OK. And that's it. You can design as many different petal shapes as your mind can think of to create all kinds of rolled paper flowers. If you'd like to learn more about designing SVG files but keep running into problems when you upload them to cutting software, Head over to Cut File Classroom and download my free Designer's Guide to Error-Free SVGs, which has 10 tips to help you avoid common mistakes when designing SVG files. If you found this video helpful, please like and subscribe, and feel free to drop any questions in the comments below. I'll see you next time.